Welcome to the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast, where host and lacrosse expert Jamie Monroe will do what he does best, talk about lacrosse. Each episode will provide listeners with education, insights, stories, and lessons about the lacrosse world. We will discuss current events, coaching, philosophies, and college lacrosse recruiting. Now let's get started with your host, Jamie Monroe.
How's it going, everybody? I'm really excited to introduce Andy Towers to all of you on the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast. Andy is a great friend of mine. We were teammates together back at Brown, and he has had a phenomenal career as a player and as a coach. Was a two-time first-team All-American and really was arguably the greatest face-off guy of all time, but at the same time really made first-team All-American because he was a great player, scored over 150 goals in his college career, played midfield and attack, and has coached the game at every single level from youth up to pros. He is going to be head coach in the new PLL. We're going to talk about that. But along the way, he's coached Division I lacrosse at Yale, at Hartford, at Dartmouth, at Brown, and honestly, one of the smartest guys in the game and one of the best guys in the game. And we're really excited to introduce you. Andy, how's it going?
It's going great, James. Thanks for that humbling intro. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it, man. So, listen, before we kind of get started, I really want to talk about PLL, but before we get there, like I do with a lot of the guests, will you just talk a little bit about your journey as a player and a coach and some of your biggest mentors and influencers that were coaches of yours along the way and players? And it might have to start with Howard Benedict, I would hope, but let's maybe you can just fill us in on some of your thoughts on that.
No question. Howard Benedict is a all-time across the board in many, many areas Hall of Famer. I was lucky, very lucky to grow up in New Canaan, Connecticut, where there was a youth league formed, and the first year of that youth league was actually my class when we were third graders. So we were sort of the first group to go through a full, 5 or 6 years of youth league lacrosse before we were ninth graders at New Canaan High School. My class, we had a great class. We had, I think, back in 1987, I think we ended up having 10 guys that went on to go play Division I lacrosse out of our class, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. But certainly it starts with Howard Benedict. Growing up in a town like New Canaan, Howard Benedict just did an unbelievable job of sort of knocking the silver spoon out of everybody's mouth day one. And, some people needed it knocked out of their mouths more than others. Certainly I was probably at the top of the list who needed it knocked out of his mouth.
What was your nickname again?
It was F.A. Jamie. And I'll let the viewers try to figure that acronym out. There was profanity in both words. Everybody else kind of had their nicknames put on the chalkboard when we were doing man-up plays, but I was known as F.A.
So it'd be like K.A. at X, Kevin Eric's, F.A. on the left.
Right. That's right. And I was F.A. And he was probably right. And so it went from Coach Benedict, who did an unbelievable job, to I did so well in school that I actually qualified for a postgraduate year in Lawrenceville.
Oh, you took a pretty good year?
Yeah, they wanted to bring me down there to make sure I was the student that I led them to believe that I was. And based on my Brown career, certainly I proved that, Jamie. So I was fortunate to go down there and did a PG year at Lawrenceville, where I played for legendary Hall of Fame coach Marshall Chambers, and then was fortunate to be recruited by another Hall of Fame coach, Dom Starsia, also PLL coach. Played for him, obviously an outstanding staff with Pete Lasagna, Paul Hooper. And then after my junior year, Dom went to Virginia. I came back. Pete had taken over the head job and hired Joe Bresci, who's now the head coach at North Carolina. And Pete and Joe Bresci, again, it was a different experience playing for them than it was for Dom, but clearly they did a phenomenal job. While we were 10-3, and I felt like we got screwed out of the playoffs in '93, the following year we were able to coach together along with Sam Jackson. So it was Sam, myself, Joe Bresci, and Pete, and we ended up going to the Final Four in '94 when David Evans was sophomore. And, that experience sort of got me into wanting to coach college lacrosse. My mentors in college lacrosse, certainly coaching with Pete and Joe Bresci. Got out of it for a couple of years, ended up taking your spot when you went to Denver. I went to Yale and worked with Mike Waldvogel and Daryl Delia and learned an unbelievable amount about the game from Coach Waldvogel in particular, just in the way that he thought, he was just an awesome guy to devil's advocate situations too, because he would, of course, have an answer that would silence you until you could regroup. And sometimes you could regroup and make a rebuttal, and other times he had you verbally pinned. But that was the magic of Mike, right? And then went and worked with Ted Spencer for a couple of years at Fairfield.
Oh, yeah.
Had some success there, and then went up to University of Hartford for a year, was going to get out of coaching after my first year at University of Hartford. It was tough to make a 90-mile commute each way for essentially no money with a brand new baby at home. And but was fortunate to get offered an opportunity to get back into the Ivy League and coach up at Dartmouth with Billy Wilson and Bartolo Governanti, and did that for 5 years, and then got an opportunity to coach at Dartmouth as the head coach, and quickly realized over the span of 5 years that the reason I got into coaching slowly became less and less of what the job actually was about. I loved going to practice every day. I didn't particularly love the other aspects of the job. And as you know, from being a head coach at DU for so many years, that, slowly the job becomes more about managing the expectations and desires of your constituents. And it seems like why you really got into it, or what the job is really about, trying to create a great experience and win games at the college level and try to build, great people. It just seemed like as time went on, it became less and less and less about that aspect in the job. And I liked coaching college lacrosse, but I honestly believe that, unless you love it like you cannot believe, it's just too much of a time commitment, with the other things that I wanted to do. And fortunately, I was able to leave on good terms with Dartmouth. It was a great experience. I wouldn't take it back, but I certainly would not go back to college coaching. The PLL is the perfect scenario. I said to my wife about 5 years ago when I got out of Dartmouth, I said, I'm so psyched to be getting out of college coaching. But what I really would love to do is to get involved with coaching where it's just about the lacrosse, and you're not looking to, manage other things that go along with it that maybe you aren't as passionate about.
Well, the lacrosse is definitely, the on the field portion of it is probably 5% of the job, between recruiting and compliance and fundraising and, all of the fires you have to put out. I mean, you're in charge of 40, 18 to 22-year-olds that are, doing what we might have done back in the day. And you can't just do that.
May or not. We may or may not.
May or may not have. FA may have.
That was a different time, Jamie, a different generation.
It was a different generation. It was beers on the bus.
It was beers on the bus.
It was beers on the bus. That was the generation. But, the one stop along the way you forgot to talk about was the one stop you forgot to talk about was the Denison stop, where you got to coach with Mike Caravana.
Mike C.
Mikey C. So
treated me very, very well.
Yeah. That was the one example where, you were, where someone learned the hard way never to do stick protection drills with no equipment on when you're playing with a long ball.
Oh, yeah. John Eidenberg. I think that John was this kid that was a junior at Denison when I went out there and coached for a year with Mike C. between my junior year at Brown and my senior year at Brown. I was encouraged by the school to take a year on, which I did, Jamie. And I was fortunate to land on my feet out there working with Mike C., living with Mike C. And we had this kid, John Eidenberg, who was just about 140 pounds. He was tough as hell. And, before practice one day, I picked up the long pole and he picked up a ball, and it started with just kind of like a little fake butt end dig, and a little butt end dig into a long john, and then he rolled back, and of course I did a
delay wrap,
forward slap, and then I did the delayed one arm wrap, and right when I did the delayed one arm wrap, Eidenberg stepped into the front end of the big fake, and sure enough, I hit him in the spot just above his top lip and below his nose, and sure enough, 4 teeth whole fell out of his mouth onto the tennis court whole, and he was fine. He like covered up his mouth, and it wasn't that big of a deal for him. I was mortified, on the verge of tears, and my buddy Brendan Gilson, who now coaches at Brunswick School in Connecticut, was a defenseman on the team, and he picked him up and goes, "Oh, don't worry, Eddie, we'll just throw these back in your mouth," and looked over at me and mouthed, "Oh my God," and rolled his eyes, and sure enough, he threw him in a little glass of milk, and they ended up getting thrown back into Eddie's mouth, and he had this extensive headgear just in time for spring break of his junior year.
I would drop a ball.
I can't imagine it helped him in the after-hours arena, but I'm sure it toned his rap having to get out of that predicament. And
the moral of that story is there's no upside if you're doing –
just walk away.
Yes, there's no upside. So you drop the ball, drop your stick, walk away.
Drop the stick, walk away.
Drop the stick and the ball, walk away.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast is brought to you in part by the JM3 Coaches Training Program. If you are a coach interested in sharpening your saw, like so many of the guests on the show, you are going to love the content in this program. Go to www.jm3coaches.com for more information.
Another funny story that I wanted to bring up was just, you invented this move. It's very rare. And it's called the trip move.
Ah, yes.
And the trip move, for those of you guys, you'll see it. Paul Rabil actually does a fair amount of trip moves. But basically, you know how like when you're coaches are like, okay, we got to be ready to slide because what if so-and-so falls down? You remember that? Like coaches would always talk about somebody falling down and then you got to be able to slide. And it occurred to me, the reason why people actually fall down is because inadvertent trip moves, which happens when you are running, turning the corner like you're going to beat them and then decide at the last second, nah, I'm not going to, and you pop out and they end up kicking your heel and falling down, and all of a sudden they fell down, but because it wasn't an on-purpose move, they don't take advantage of it. But the fact is that you figured out a way to actually do a trip move on and off the ball. Tell us a little bit about that and how Mike Waldvogel responded during practice.
Yeah, no, that's no doubt. So that move came about when I was coaching at Yale, and we were doing one-on-ones from above the goal. And I liked to do one-on-ones from spots where we dodged from them. We ran a lot of 1-4-1, so we would do one-on-ones from the top center of the goal. And, from your time at Yale, a little different than it is now at Yale, but we had some good players, but we just had trouble consistently creating slides off the dodge with the offensive players that we had. And as you remember, Mike Morris, who we called Tyke because he was short in stature, but shorter in character. No, I'm joking, Mike. You aren't. And so he was insistent that he could beat anybody off the dodge, and he had a quick lateral direction, which was good, but he didn't have great out-and-out speed. And so what happened was our more athletic D midfielders and poles would have a tendency to step out and really pressure our guys. Our guys would make the first move, and they would create a little bit of separation. And then sure enough, the better athletes would close on these guys and would really be able to land checks, get good depth on their checks, not only the poles, but also the short sticks. And so what we started to do was we would do the split, make the sprint, and as these guys were starting to close, we would slow up just a little bit, and then with our inside foot, just step in to their recovery, and sure enough, they'd go down. And we did it, and Mike was a smart, really smart guy. They're all smart guys, but Mike was very smart in figuring it out and became unbelievably good at it. And probably in about a span of maybe 5 minutes of one-on-ones, we probably did 10 or 15. We probably had 5 or 6 successful trip moves. And finally, Coach Waldvogel just goes, "What's going on? Why is everybody falling?" And it was just like a belly laugh for the offensive guys and myself. But at that point, it became something that we leaned on quite a bit because it really is a weapon. Because the trip move, of course, you're going to get that late in the dodge. And if you get it late in the dodge against a team that isn't sliding, you're going to be in a position to get some good scoring opportunities out of that. And I've taken that, and now my son James does it all the time, and we laugh about it all the time. And, trying to think about how to integrate it into other sports. You can do it in basketball. You can do it in football. But in lacrosse, it really seems like it's easy to exploit.
As you know, I taught Colin how to do that when he was about 6. And
I loved that story. What was that story again? That Colin was racing his buddy in the street? Can you?
Yeah, well, Sarah was walking up to get Colin at school. He lived down the street from the elementary school, and him and his buddy saw, Mom, and so they like sprinted down to him, and all of a sudden, Isaac just went down hard. And it was like he's like all skinned hands and chin, and Colin looks at Sarah, and he feels really bad, and he's just like, I did the fake. We called it the fake pop out.
Yeah, I love it.
You can't yell, "Hey, do a trip move," because but you could say, "Hey, do a fake pop out," because it really is kind of a fake pop out.
Absolutely.
But anyways, he was like, I did the fake pop out, but I thought he would fall on the grass. So I had to ban the fake pop out because it just was it was like it was stunting his growth.
Well, the race was too close. The race was too close. And he was, Colin was really in a corner at that point. So hopefully Sarah was able to alleviate any guilt associated with skinning up his friend's chin and knee on the pavement. That is pebbles in the hands. Pebbles in the hands.
It was the good old days. But so, I worked on the trip move at DU. We did that all the time, and it truly is. Not everybody can do it that well. And it's funny because there were some guys that were really tall that had a very easy time doing it. And there were other guys, like Mike Morris, that were shorter guys that were pretty good at it. It's definitely worth doing. And if you watch, it does happen.
You could set it up.
Snyder used to do it all the time. He did it with his left forearm to freaking hammer the guy right over his. I think they outlawed it in NLL. Actually, there's an offensive trip in the NLL now. I think mostly because Snyder and Rabil did it all the time.
Well, it's an easy thing to get. The key is getting the on-ball defender to open up his hips and go full speed. When you get him to open up his hips and accelerate full speed to stay in the play, that's when you get him. If you try to do it too early, you're not going to get him because the defender has to sort of be out of control a little bit.
Yeah.
To not, be able to make the adjustment when you step into him to go down. And, some people, like you said, some people just pick it up and some people are super nice kids.
Yeah. And some people get Charlie horses in their calves like me whenever I would try to do it. But I think it was because I never got anyone going full speed. So I would just end up getting a knee to the calf.
You got to really let it develop. You got to really develop. It's a great thing to be aware of for guys that, maybe aren't incredibly fast, knowing that those are the guys that are ripest to get pressured by defenders. If they don't pressure you, you're not getting it.
That's true also. Yeah, true.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast is made possible in part by the JM3 video assessment tool. There's no question that video is critical to player development. One way or another, your son or daughter must utilize video to learn their game and the game. To learn more, see video testimonials, or register, go to www.jm3sports.com/video right now.
All right, let's turn the subject over to the PLL. So tell us a little bit about the process, your thoughts on it, the process of being hired. Maybe there's some things that you aren't allowed to disclose yet, but the stuff that you are, please share with us how excited you are and your thoughts on this whole thing and kind of what your plans are.
Yeah, well, first up, I just can't overstate how appreciative I am of the opportunity that Paul and Mike have given me. I can't overstate how humbling it is to be part of something that's so incredibly exciting, probably the most exciting news in this sport in a long, long time. And, to not only be selected by those guys, but also to be coaching alongside Hall of Famer Dom Starsia, longtime D1 coaches, Staggs, Batesy, John Paul, Nat St. Laurent. I love the camaraderie that the group already has, not to mention being able to coach with that group with and against, and be able to, coach what will be the best players in the world. Hopefully we can bring out the best in them, but they don't need anybody to tell them how to play. If we're able to give them some loose structure so that they feel empowered by scheme and not micromanaged, and, ideally put the right combinations together and allow dialogue to dictate product, I think, we're going to be successful. But I don't have a doubt in my mind that the league is going to be successful. I mean, it's really, really impressive listening to these guys talk. I mean, they really are some smart guys, and they've got some serious backing with some really smart people, everybody geared to making this thing go. And I think just what they've been able to accomplish in such a short time sets the foundation for even wilder success down the road. I mean, they're really going to bring the sport into households all across the country that just aren't that familiar with the product or the sport at this point. So these guys are phenomenal.
Yeah. Paul Rabil is incredibly impressive. We already know he's an all-time great player, but his business acumen, his work ethic.
He is, he makes you, he kind of has like an Elon Musk-ish to him a little bit, the way he thinks outside the box and the way he seems to understand social media and so many of the things around it. Obviously he's a phenomenal athlete, a great lacrosse player, and has been for a long time, but I'm not so sure he's not a smarter guy than he is great athlete. I mean, that's a fact. And all you got to do is listen to him. I listened to his podcast a bunch of times before the PLL even really was officially announced, and remember thinking to myself, what the hell is he saying? Like he says so many things that you're kind of like, what does that mean? And usually I don't have a problem understanding people, but he really is, got a vision and seems to have a very concrete plan to execute that vision. And it's humbling and exciting to be part of it.
Yeah, it's really cool. And the whole, I've really taken a deep dive into digital marketing myself. And it's really been because I went and sold 3D, and I have a non-compete, so I'm not allowed to do anything in person anymore, but I still have this passion. And so he's really been a guy that I have followed closely and been just pretty blown away by. And he was smart enough to get into it really early. So, he understands. It takes so many years of time to really understand the ins and outs of how to leverage social media. It's not just about how many followers you have or, what you post. There's so much more to it as far as learning how to monetize it.
And he does it humbly. He does it humbly. He's, yeah, I mean,
he does it the right way. Yeah, no doubt about it. I think it's really cool. And this coaching staff is awesome. It's great group of guys. And it's going to be really interesting to sort of see how the teams come together. And, it's going to be a lot of the best players in the world playing in a new arena. There's going to be a major excitement. I think the traveling model, I think, is really cool too. I think it's without a question, it's very doable to be able to pack stadiums, one weekend at a time in different places around the country where folks are starved for it. And I think a lot of people are like, well, how do you have a fan base? Well, listen, most people in pro sports are fans of players more so than they are, like if Houston's on in the NBA, I'm watching Harden.
Right.
If the Lakers are on, it's because if I'm watching, it's because I'm watching LeBron or it was Kobe or Michael. I wasn't, I was a Celtics fan, but I watched the Bulls because I wanted to watch Michael Jordan play. And so it's going to be the same for lacrosse too.
Well, that's a lot of the due diligence that they did on this. The marketing research, yielded the exact same evidence. And clearly they're taking that into consideration with the way that they're structuring the game day experience here. And, no doubt, I love the model as well.
Very cool. All right. So for all of you listeners out there, this podcast today was, kind of like your typical model that I've used as far as talking to folks about their coaching journey and their mentors and what they're up to. But I also want to introduce the fact that Andy and I are going to attempt to do a weekly in season is what we're going to call this edition of the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast. And our in season edition will be a weekly Tuesday podcast in which we're going to talk about current events. We're going to talk about college lacrosse. I mean, we can talk about anything really, but I think we'll probably be talking about, our passion, which is what's going on in Division I college lacrosse. I figure we'll sort of finish up today's podcast with just setting the table for that, with maybe talking about some of the storylines and some of the preparation that goes into, just knowing what's going on. So why don't you kick this off, Andy, with some thoughts that you have coming into the year?
I think that this year, first of all, I'm really looking forward to it, Jamie, since RD went to Bucknell and we were no longer able to continue the In Your Face podcast that we did 2 years ago. This is a really, really awesome thing for us to be able to do.
Fun.
The hope is that we add value to the listeners, and they may not always love what we say, but we're gonna be honest. Listen, what I'm looking for most about this college season is I feel like it's the year of the attackman more than anything else. You look at the return of Pat Spencer and Loyola. You look at Jeff Teat and Cornell. You look at Michael Krause down at Virginia. You look at Michael Sowers at Princeton. I feel like this is – I can't remember a year, outside of last year, because so many of these guys have been, 2 and 4-year starters based on what year they are in college. But I'm really excited to watch particularly these 4 teams at the top, which I consider the top 4, well, maybe 5. But I really think that with Yale, Maryland, Duke, Loyola, Cornell, to me, those 5 are established. And then you've got programs that are right there behind them. I think Virginia is kind of in a unique standalone spot there at 6. While they haven't really done it yet, Lars has obviously turned the program around in that they're, now winning ACC games. And, they're very, very close to winning, I think probably 3 more games last year. And, I don't think it would have surprised anybody if Virginia had gone to the Final Four. Loyola did, and Loyola beat them, I think, 13-11 in that quarterfinal game or whatever that was, first-round game. It wouldn't surprise me to see Virginia go and win the national championship this year. It wouldn't. Yep. But they gotta go farther than the first round. For me to feel like they're in that top group. I don't have them in that top group yet. Mm-hmm. But I am looking forward to, watching these attackmen play this year. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, well, and, you think about attackmen years of the past. It was the Mikey Powell and Ryan Boyle, Doniger, there was a year in 2004 where there was I can't remember all the rest of the guys, but this year, we didn't even talk about Bernhardt. You mentioned Maryland, but
Bernhardt absolutely in that group, right? Absolutely.
Wow. And I'm putting Asher Nolting in that group too. You wait to see this guy play. This
high point.
Phenomenal.
Carrying it up, right. How about Grant Ament? How's he not in that group? He's 3 and 7.
Grant Ament. 3-7 in his first game.
Mark Millen had tweeted out after that performance on Saturday that, 2 years ago, everybody was talking about Grant Ament being amongst the very, very best players in the country. And last year, unfortunately, he gets hurt, doesn't play. And then he comes back, first game back against, let's face it, a very well-coached team every year in Villanova, and torches them for 3-7. But I think Grant Ament is in that group. There's no question Bernhardt's in that group. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Bernhardt ends up being National Player of the Year. He usually
he's out
2-1 like he did the first game against Bucknell. But the reality is if Maryland goes and wins the national championship and he plays as he's capable of playing, he's arguably the best playmaker in college lacrosse. But I think that there's another 6 to 8, 10 guys that are also right in that same category. There's just a lot of depth.
Yeah, it's going to be, I agree. You're the attackman. It's going to be exciting. I had an opportunity to travel around to 10 programs the last week. And, I would have loved for you to come along. You would have added to the environment of the RV.
I followed, might have been a little cramped in there, James. Tight. Might have been a little tight in there, but
number one rule.
I'm following all of the journey on Twitter, and certainly we spoke, a little bit at the end, and I was following it on Inside Lacrosse. So you went. So let me get this straight. I know you opened up going to Northwestern, and then you went to Cleveland State.
No, so I went Northwestern, Michigan, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Cleveland State, Penn State for the Army scrimmage, Colgate on a Sunday, Monday at Albany, then down to Annapolis to Navy on Tuesday, Virginia Wednesday, High Point Thursday, and then down to Atlanta, checked out the Carolina opener versus Mercer on the Saturday the 2nd.
So when we spoke yesterday when I was playing Golden Tee, the question I, of course, asked you was, what was the most impressive environment? And, you had stated that you can't really answer that question as they were all different.
Yes.
If you had to say that there was one commonality between all of the programs and the coaching staffs and, your sort of peek into the culture that you got on this trip, what would you say the one commonality between those 10 stops was?
So I would say that, one big one was just the openness and welcoming environment that the coaches had for our being there and allowing us to take that peek. These guys are incredibly passionate about their teams, about lacrosse, about learning, sharing, as I always say, the great game of lacrosse. And, the commonality is that these guys are all building, you use the word culture. And I think it is, it used to be that you just kind of coach the kids and your best X's and O's worked, but it is the culture of the program, and it's reflected in the head coach. And I would say that the commonality is just the commitment to building the culture and the vision of these head coaches and these staffs was truly impressive, and their openness and willingness to share was really appreciated. Very cool.
I think that's great feedback, and that's interesting. I think when you interact with coaches, I think that when you see coaches that are open and are open to sharing what they do and open to hearing other ideas, you really speak to coaches' confidence and their ability to do the job the right way. You and I were speaking yesterday and kind of covering the Super Bowl and talking about Bill Belichick. And, one of the things that we spoke about, which is so impressive about Bill Belichick, is you look at his coaching tree. They had an article in the New York Post, I think on Friday or Saturday before Sunday's Super Bowl. And you look at Bill Belichick's coaching tree, and it's about 35 or 40 coaches that are now established, head coaches either in the NFL, high level college football, or assistants in the NFL at high level college football. And they're really, it's unbelievable. And you think about these guys were all on Bill Belichick's staff at one point, right? Bill Belichick is not holding stuff from his staff when they're on his staff, as they're looking to win the Super Bowl every single year, and they've done it, more than everybody else. It's incredible how these guys go on after working for Bill Belichick, and some become wildly successful. Others are in the process of pursuing success, but nobody seems to be able to replicate Bill Belichick's success, yet he's open with all of his staff when they're on his staff during that respective season, yet he still remains the best at what he does. It really is. It shows you how much more football he knows than everybody else. Or, what Tony Romo was saying, what he maybe does better than anybody else is he's able to articulate the changes that they're going to make over the course of the week, and then have those guys go out and execute that on point, on time. To be able to do that, week to week, or, in a 2-week prep for the Super Bowl against the other best team in the world, it's just unbelievable.
It is. And, you make a point that just dawned on me that's super interesting, which is that you talk about the confidence in coaches being open, because at the end of the day, nobody can do what they do. Nobody can do what I can do. Nobody can do what you can do. You can take things and try to make it your own, but it becomes your own, right?
Yeah.
And that's the cool part about it. And the fact is that I can tell you everything I'm going to do, and you say, I'm interested in knowing it, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyways, right? And it'd be the same for you. Like, I want to know what you're doing, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do all of it. And that's pretty much the truth. So anybody who gets caught up in worrying about people knowing what they're doing, I get it. There's a certain amount of secrecy that you might want to have. But the example you gave with Bill Belichick is these guys can't do, and they know everything that Bill does.
Right.
And they can't
That's
do
exactly right. The guy that you really, or the example I would say, which is perhaps the greatest in our sport is Kevin and Gerry Byrne out at Notre Dame. The fact that these guys put all of their drills out there for the world to see, and they're still able year in, year out to have, arguably the best defense in the country. And I think are probably widely recognized as the best defensive staff in the country. And Gerry coaching that, is certainly deserving of all the credit that he gets. But the fact that Gerry puts it all out there for everybody to see, all the drills and how to integrate it. And let's face it, I listened to the podcast that you had when he was on it. We had him on In Your Face a couple years ago. And it's full disclosure every time.
And guess what? Nobody, 75% of the people don't like a V-hold.
Right. I mean, it's just like you said.
Like, no V-hold. I get it. There's a different way to skin a cat. That's just a perfect example. I mean, you can't argue with Notre Dame being among the best defensive coach teams year in and year out, and they are like as heavy on V-holds as anybody on the planet. And yet, there's a lot of people that are like, well, we don't do that. And that just goes to show you that there are different ways to skin a cat.
What's a better sales pitch for the top recruits in the country than here's who we are, and we're still getting it done at a higher level than everybody else, and we're telling everybody what we're doing.
Yeah. Now, that said, I don't think Bill Belichick is going to be going full disclosure on all the secrets to the rest of the world.
No, but like you said, the people that speak his language of football all are able to identify everything that he does.
Yeah.
And the guys that worked under him clearly understand the thought process behind what he does. And yet they aren't able to replicate that. In a salary cap free agency sport, this isn't baseball. I mean, it's unreal what he's been able to do. And, we're fortunate to be viewers at a time when he's coaching.
Yeah, no doubt. Any other thoughts, Andy, on the year before we sort of wrap this first in-season Phi-Lacrosse-ophy edition up?
No, I think it's going to be exciting to watch how the shot clock affects these games. It's going to be interesting to see, the fallout from that positive or negatively on how that affects face-offs and goaltending stats. How teams choose to defend, how teams try to manage the shot clock and still control tempo. That will be a challenge to see. It's going to be interesting to see which staffs get out in front of these rule changes and are able to integrate strategies that manage the games on both ends of the fields and in special situations better than their peers, and see where that leads come playoff time in May.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think that we're all going to be happy not to have to have our finger on the remote control fast forward button during the course of college lacrosse games on the replays, because literally all I would do is fast forward for the first minute and a half of almost every possession while people were spinning it before the timer came on or was close to coming on. No more possession shots. People are going to be trying to score, which means that defenses are going to have to try to stop people from scoring, from the beginning of the possession. People are going to be attacking. Of course, the idea of controlling tempo is going to still exist, but I think you're going to have to take the first good shot you have instead of, being incredibly picky. And I think that's going to be better for the viewer for sure.
Right.
I think, yeah.
I think that you look at all this stuff, and this is maybe a discussion for another day, but the rules that are going to come about due to the rule changes for this season. The number one rule I'm calling that the committee puts in next time is they're going to legalize cross-checking. They've got it. If these attackmen can attack the goal on a dive with a shot clock, and the end of the shot clock, they're going to be dodging to the goal harder than ever before, you've got to give the defense some power back. And if you can't, let's face it, everybody already cross-checks, but it's not considered a legal play, yet it's almost hardly ever called.
Right.
I think you've got to just make cross-checking flat out legal, and not necessarily where you're using a cross-check as a hit, so to speak. You're taking 5 steps and cross-checking somebody in the neck or chest to put them down. That I don't think should be legalized. But what should be legalized is cross-check holds. You've got to be able to allow these guys, you got to give them the tools that allow them to counter a dodger that's attacking you now. And right now, you don't allow these guys to do that unless you give them some power back. So I'd like to see that rule come into play. And if there is a prop bet for the next rules committee cycle, I'm putting my money on the prop bet that legalized cross-checking becomes part of the Division I, college game. That's what I think.
Well, I think it's a great point, but I think before they do that, they got to figure out what the dive rule actually is. Because right now, I really think it's going to be a problem. I think that what seemed like was going to be awesome is going to be kind of a drag because of they've made it so hard to call, as far as, landing, in the little snow cone that the refs created, unilaterally that they presented at the IMLCA and USILA meetings.
I eat snow cones. I don't land in them.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty, that says it all.
That's it.
So I think that's going to be kind of a drag because I think it could be such a great play. I just don't know why they couldn't just go with the MLL rule.
I agree.
Penalty.
Look,
if the goalie's trying to dive into you, then it's not. Either the ball's in the goal before you land. All these extra things just ruined what could have been a great rule.
I don't see, is the dive into the goal, is that much dangerous than any other part of the game? I really don't think that's the case. Look, if you run and you jump and your foot is not touching the crease or obviously in the crease, the goal's good.
Right.
I think the goal's good.
And I think wiping out the goalie.
And the goalie can decide how the goalie wants to play that. If you're Scotty Raj and you want to come out and meet the guy, well, that's your prerogative. Maybe these coaches need to recruit, bigger, more physical goalies. Maybe that's the adjustment. I don't know, exactly what the deal is, but I'm with you. You can't say, well, he jumped into the goalie this time and this time he didn't jump into the goal. What's to prevent the goalie from stepping up and taking a charge?
They are doing that. That's exactly what is happening. And that happened in the Duke Furman game, I think. And I think that what?
It's very sleazy.
It is. But on the other hand, if you're going to if you're going to go from, potential goal scored against to 1 minute unreleasable, on the positive end, and you got a good face-off guy and a good man-up unit, that's going to win a game for you. So, sacrifice your goalie and just step out and take that charge every time.
Well,
so I think that rule was too bad that it's too complicated.
We'll see what happens when Denver plays Ohio State again in the Final Four, and somebody jumps and dunks it and runs into the Ohio State goalie. Coach Tierney's going to lose his mind. With that, if the subjectiveness of that call goes, the other way. He lost his mind then, and it was the right call.
Yeah. Although in that particular play, he jumped behind the net, so it would have been good. Goal.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you need to make it black and white.
Yeah.
And my feeling.
Or not? Did you run the goalie or not? I think that's it.
It doesn't matter if you hit the goal. It doesn't matter. It can't matter. And listen, is that collision any different than any other collision? No. You've got a guy jumping in. You've got one adult jumping into another adult. If I'm the adult that's getting jumped into, I'm really not that concerned about getting hurt. I'm not. Every once in a while they might get hurt. But you know what? In life, every once in a while you get hurt. That's what happens. That's life. I just don't think that they've got to make it black and white. It can't be, what was he trying to do here? Come on.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what about the size of the box? Do you think that's going to result in more transition? Obviously, they made the rule to extend the size of the box years back to try to increase transition.
Puts it back.
Yeah, to backfire.
I don't know. I don't see it as that big of a deal. I mean, I guess it's a little bit big of a deal, but for the most part, people on their rides are dropping back. And you might get a little bit of an advantage. Maybe with the shot clock rule in place, the extended box would be utilized more aggressively than it would be with a narrower box. Because if you're thinking, hey, you know what, we only have a certain amount of time to get a shot anyways, and this guy coming out of the box might give us, a little bit of an advantage. Maybe they push that 5-on-4 that's not quite a 5-on-4, rather than settle it up and worry about not getting something as good in a 6-on-6.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. And that's going to be a fun part, is checking out all these rules along the way. So Andy, really pumped up to do this. I will catch up with you next week, and really looking forward to our in-season edition of the Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast that we'll be doing on Tuesdays throughout the 2019 season.
Looking tough.
All right, bro. Talk to you soon.
Hey, bud.
Later.
The Phi-Lacrosse-ophy podcast is brought to you in part by the JM3 Lacrosse Academy. This 10-week online program is designed to teach cutting-edge lacrosse skills and IQ. Athletes will learn dozens of new techniques, creative drills, X's and O's, and most importantly, how to integrate it all into their game. To learn more or start getting better today, go to www.jm3sports.com/academy.